Today we're going to talk about Noah. We're going to talk about him and learn for Father's Day, learn some lessons from his life as we deal with fatherhood today. I want to begin by reading something that I have in my notes. It is a worldly perspective. I want to kind of contrast it with what is really important in fatherhood. This was written by Martha Bolton, and it's entitled, "What is Fatherhood?" And so this is from the world's perspective, but it kind of gives you a few chuckles at the same time. Listen to what it says. It says, "Fatherhood is getting to go anywhere you want for Father's Day, getting to drive there, and even getting to pay the bill. It's getting up in the middle of the night to see what the noise was outside when you'd really rather stay in bed and hide like everyone else. It's the best excuse in the world to buy all those toys you wanted as a child and never got. It's catching yourself watching cartoons when no one else is home and enjoying them. It's biting your tongue and remembering to be a good example when someone cuts you off on the highway. It's playing Santa at midnight on Christmas Eve, then paying for the privilege at 22% interest for 36 consecutive months. It's assembling toys that require one screwdriver and a nuclear physicist to assemble. It's praying for, hoping for, and anxiously looking forward to the day when your kids will be out of the house on their own, and then trying to postpone that day as long as you possibly can when it approaches. It's carrying sleeping kids into the house when you're too tired to even carry yourself in. Yes, fatherhood is sometimes a thankless job of fixing kites, breaking up fights, wiping up chocolate milk. It's dental bills, broken arms, and skateboards." That's basically the world's perspective of what fatherhood is. But fatherhood is being a spiritual leader in the family. The most important thing, I always tell guys this whenever they're getting married, I emphasize this to our son-in-law, who is son-in-law now, wasn't whenever I emphasized it to him, that whenever he married our daughter, that he needed to understand that he was stepping up to a higher level of accountability, because he was becoming the spiritual leader of a family that did not exist before. And that one day he would stand before God, and his life goes on before me, and he would be held accountable for how he does how he did before God as the spiritual leader. And a lot of guys don't understand that. They think it's all about, as that list said, it's about making money, doing things for the kids, providing everything that they need as far as monetary things in life. And those things are important. A dad needs to work and he needs to provide for his family. But the most important thing that you will ever do for your children is that you will lead them spiritually. And whenever we get down to the end of the day, I got some statistics that were done by I think it's by Baptist Press or something. They ran some statistics and did some polls, and I think you will be taken back to find out how important the dad's role is in the family as far as being the spiritual leader. So what we're going to do today is this. We're going to just take Noah. I'm not going to give you anything that you've not heard before, I doubt, but we're going to go over Noah's life with kind of a microscope, and we're going to see some points in Noah's life that need to be evident in our lives as dads. These are things that need to be there. This is what we need to practice. So the first one that we're going to talk about is that Noah walked by faith. You kind of know that just from the story, but I want to get into a few other things here, if I could. Before I go back, we're going to go back to Genesis chapter 5 here in a moment. Let me just say this. Noah walked by faith after he was saved. He was saved by faith before that. He was saved because he had faith in a promise of a future redeemer. Back in Genesis chapter 3, 14 and 15, whenever God was speaking to Adam and Eve and to the serpent, These are the words that were spoken, Genesis 3:14 and 15. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Let me just real quick explain that without going into great detail. So the announcement to Satan here is that there would be a seed of a woman. The seed of the woman would bruise the head of Satan, meaning crush Satan, destroy Satan. Also, we are told here that Satan would bruise his heel. That would happen at the cross. 2,000 years ago, roughly 4,000 or 6,000 years ahead to this point, from this point right here. Either way, it would be at the cross when Jesus would die. But ultimately, the end result would be that there would be a Redeemer that would come in the world that would eventually destroy Satan. His reign would be over. Adam and Eve believed that, and they were saved. They trusted in a future Redeemer. You see, people of the Old Testament look from the Old Testament ahead to the cross. That's how they were saved. We look back to the cross. They didn't have the details that we have. They only had to believe what was the revelation that was given to them. Very little detail, but this is what they were required to believe. That got passed down. Noah believed that. Noah looked forward to a future Redeemer that would come into the world and would destroy Satan. He was basically, though he didn't understand it, he was looking ahead to the cross. He was looking for a day whenever there would be one that would come that would destroy Satan. He believed the promise of God, and so therefore Noah was saved. He was saved by grace through faith. A lot of people think the Old Testament saints were saved by works. I've heard that over and over again. I've heard people say, well, the Old Testament saints were saved by keeping the law. Absolutely not. The law was never given as a means of salvation. The law was given as a means so that man could see his sinfulness in God's holiness, so that man would see his need of a Savior. And so Noah understood his need of a Savior. Was he a perfect man? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. He was by no means perfect. None of us are. No dad is perfect. I said, whenever during the wedding, I said to my daughter, before we walked out of the building to get ready to go up the aisle, it was an aisle of trees that led up to the altar where the ceremony took place. And she said something to me that made me reflect back. And I said, Taylor, as a dad, I said, I've made many mistakes in my life. And I said, I apologize for every mistake that I've ever made as a dad. I said, I don't like it. But that's the way it is as a dad. You make mistakes. You do. None of us are perfect. Neither was Noah. But he was a man that was saved. He knew Christ. In a sense, he knew Christ. He looked forward to the day when that future Redeemer would come. And so, guys, I will say this to you without going too far into it. The greatest gift that you can give to your kids is to know Christ as Savior and walk in faith in Him and trust in Him. That's exactly what Noah did. Noah was trusting in God through his life, and it's magnified in several places. First of all, it's in his family. Now, let me show you something. Come back to chapter 5, verse 25. Let me read a few verses here if I could. 5:25 through 32. In Methuselah, that would be Noah's grandfather. And if you remember, whenever we studied the book of Genesis, Methuselah's name had a very significant meaning. It meant when he dies, it will come. So Methuselah's father, who was Enoch, apparently was given information, a revelation from God, that whenever this child dies, there will be a judgment that comes. There will be something catastrophic that will come. Methuselah's name meant that very thing. When he dies, it will come. And I believe that is why God allowed Methuselah to live longer than anybody else, 969 years, because that was the extension of God's grace, because God's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So Methuselah lived longer than anybody else, as God prolonged that judgment. Let me go back to that verse again, verse 25. And Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech. And Methuselah lived after he begat Lamech 782 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. And Lamech lived 182 years, and he begat a son, and he called his name Noah. So here you find out that Noah's dad's name is Lamech. So that makes Noah is the grandson of Methuselah. So Noah knew, no doubt, knew Methuselah, because Methuselah would die, and whenever Noah would be 600 years old, because you're going to see here in a moment that the flood came whenever Noah was 600 years old. So Noah had 600 years with his grandfather, okay? But there was also a revelation that was given whenever Noah was born. Watch verse 29 now. And he called his name Noah, saying, the same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed. So there was something given to Lamech, and Lamech understood somehow, some way, that Noah would be a guy that God would use in a miraculous way as a means of salvation. And that would be that he would build the ark. Exactly what would happen. Verse 30. And Lamech lived after he begat Noah 595 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. Now pay attention to verse 32. And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So Noah becomes a father at 500 years old. I can't imagine that, but their conditions back then were a whole lot different than what they are today, without a doubt. So at 500 years old, he becomes a father. Now, let me just stay with me for a moment. Watch on the screen Genesis 7:6. It says, and Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. Okay, so he's 500 when the children are born. He's 600 when the flood comes. So you had 100 years in there. Okay, now let me show you one other thing. Come to chapter 6, verse 3. Watch this announcement. Chapter 6:3 says, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Now, just hold on for a moment. So, God makes an announcement that in 120 years, the flood would come. It would come whenever Noah would be 600 years old. So if you subtract 120 off of the 600, you go back to 480 years old when Noah gets the announcement about the flood, 480. It's interesting to me that 20 years later, he becomes a father. 20 years after the announcement of the flood, he and his wife apparently make the choice to have children. And I say this, that alone, whenever I calculate that out, that alone tells me of the faith that this man had. Because he knew there was a judgment coming. Not only that, watch chapter 6, verse 5. Watch this. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Watch verse 11. And the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. Watch verse 13. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence to them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Man's depravity was on full display in Noah's day. So I want to go back to his faith and the whole thing with family. I point all of that out because there would be people that would say, if they were living in this situation right here, I mean, this is really, really bad. It says in verse 5, every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And in verse 11, it says, the earth was filled with violence. Those are pretty powerful statements. Every imagination of man's heart was evil continually. No good thoughts, what we would consider to be good thoughts, none of those. The earth filled with violence, no pockets of places where there was peace, where there was, what I'll use today's term, Christian influence. None of that. It was a wicked earth. So people that from today would look back and they would, if they had all these facts and they put that together, they would say this: a man and a woman would be foolish to bring children into the world in those conditions. I've heard that said today. I've heard it said today that why would anybody bring children into the world today based on the conditions of this world? The way things are going, the way leadership is, the way the whole homosexual and transgender and everything else is being put out there right in the front. Why would you want to bring a child into this world today? I've heard that many times. And if anybody had a reason to not procreate, it would have been Noah, because the guy knows the judgment's coming. He knows that there is going to be a flood that is going to destroy every person that is not saved. Why would you have children in those conditions? Because you don't know how they're going to grow up. Why would he bring children into a world where every imagination of the people's hearts was only evil continually? Why would he bring children into a world that was completely filled with violence, where there were no pockets of peaceful communities or anything of that sort? Why would he do that? And I'll tell you why. Because he was a man that was walking by faith. That's why. He was a man that trusted God, and ultimately what he was doing, he was just being obedient to a command that God had given to Adam and Eve, but ultimately it was for all of mankind. Genesis 1:27, 28, it said, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. He was being obedient to that. He was following through. He was just doing what God had commanded to do, and he was trusting God in the midst of the circumstance, because he was determined, and we're going to see this in a little bit, that he was determined that he could teach his kids about God, and that they would grow up different than everybody else in the society, because he had faith in God, that God would use what he poured in to these individuals. Though he didn't have the revelation of the entire scriptures like we have, he had enough truth. He knew that he could pour it into those kids, and that they could grow up, and that they could make a difference. And whenever I was preparing this, and this was yesterday evening, I was meditated on this throughout the week, but I was thinking about something. I thought, how different would our world be today if people thought like Noah? Because I've heard this before. I've heard people complain because they see large families. They say, well, why would people do that? Money's tight anyhow. Why would they have large families? Why would they do that? The person that makes that statement has no faith in God whatsoever. None. They've got none. Because when Noah got off the ark, this command right here, to be fruitful, multiply, is in the Noahic covenant, and that's never been rescinded. It's never been rescinded. We are to have children, and we are to teach, and we are to train them in the Word of God, and we are to trust God to meet the needs as we go through life. I said to my wife, if we could back up, I said, we'd have had a whole house full of them. I look at our grandkids now, with Kate being up to 4, And I heard her say after 50 hours of labor with Lexi here just recently, I heard her say, probably won't be any more. And it made me sad. Because when you're around the kids, there's a joy there. And I know it's, on a mom and dad, it's stressful. I know what my daughter goes through, and I know what we go through whenever we watch them. I know how it wears me out, but I can give them back. And I know how expensive they can be, too. I know they can be rather expensive. And so anyhow, all that said to say this. If we're going to walk by faith, which is what we are commanded to do, then in the day and age in which we live in, society should by no means dictate whether we're going to trust God or whether we're not. I mean, you got an option. Are you going to go with what society is saying, or are you going to go with what God is saying? Watch Hebrews chapter 10, 38, 39. Watch this. Now the just shall live by faith, but if any man draw back, my soul shall have no pleasure in him. See that? The just shall live by faith. We are saved by grace through faith, and then we are called to live by faith. Verse 20 or 39 says, but we are not of them who draw back unto perdition, but of them that believe to the saving of the soul. The majority of the people today are controlled by the climate of our society. I'm not talking the weather. I'm just talking about society as a whole. And so for that reason, the majority of people are unstable and paranoid. That should never be the case for believers. Never. Never, ever. People today are fixed on what's happening in society. And so the things that go on in the world, the news dictates to them how they are to live. You and I as believers, we are to rely upon God's word to tell us how to live. We're to trust God, no matter how difficult things get, no matter how trying it may be. We are to be obedient to God. Let me give you another example. If we could fast forward, and we're not going to turn there, but if we could fast forward, we could go to the book of Exodus. And you remember whenever Israel was just multiplying and the Egyptians couldn't slow it down, and Pharaoh gives the command to all the midwives that they were to kill the baby boys. Hit them on the head or something whenever they're born, and take them out and throw them in the Nile River where the crocodiles will feed on them. Throw them out there. You would look at that situation and you would say, who in the world would ever bring a child into that situation where there is a death sentence on every little boy that was ever born? I don't know about you, but I'm thankful. I'm thankful as I read that story, I'm thankful that Moses' parents did not let society dictate to them what they ought to do. But instead, they allowed God and his word to dictate what they ought to do. Because out of that came Moses. And we have the first 5 books of the Bible penned by that individual. We have Psalm 99 penned by Moses. So much to learn from him. So much to learn from that guy. And so I say that to say this. That as dads, we can't let society dictate how we live our life. We've got to walk by faith. And as we go through, the darker the world gets and the more difficult things become, remember this verse, 1 Peter 3:15. It says, but sanctify the Lord God in your hearts and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you the reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. Okay, so as a dad, as a mom, anybody, as a believer, I am to live in a way that I am to be ready to give an answer for the reason of the hope that is in me. Now listen, if I'm going to answer for the hope, somebody's got to see the hope in order to ask about the hope. They have to be able to see the hope in me. And so therefore, I can't, the culture of my day, the climate of our day cannot dictate whether I'm up or whether I'm down. My joy doesn't come from money. My joy doesn't come from things. That's all. Don't get me wrong. Those things are nice, but you can't let them become that which dictates how you're going to go through this life. They cannot become your God. My hope is not in a bank account. My hope is not in the things that I own. My hope is in my God. That's the way it ought to be. And my kids need to see that. My children, my grandkids need to see, look, that Jesus said that as I go through life, I am to occupy till he comes. That means this, that I continue to live my life the way that I am supposed to live my life, and the society does not dictate what I do or what I don't do. The Wall Street Journal, what comes out of the, or out of the, not the Wall Street Journal, but the stock market does not dictate what I do. I don't get foolish with things, but that does not become my God. And that's what I'm saying. Noah was a man that trusted God. To bring children into the world in which he lived in, to me, that took a tremendous amount of faith. A tremendous amount of faith. Knowing what was coming, that there was a flood coming whenever all that were not saved were going to be destroyed. Not only the people, but also the animals. Not knowing when it would, exactly when it would come and how it was all going to unfold in his own family, yet they still made the choice to have children. To me, that magnifies Noah's faith without a doubt. So it's seen in his faith is seen in his family. His faith is also seen in his service. Watch chapter 6, 13 through 18, if you would. Watch this. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. This is the fashion which thou shalt make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and a cubit shalt thou finish it above. And a door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories. And thou shalt make it. And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy it, to destroy all flesh wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee I will establish my covenant, that thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife and thy sons' wives with thee. Noah was commanded by God to build an ark. You know the story. It was a means of salvation. As far as we know, for 120 years, Noah cut lumber, hammered nails, until the ark was slowly put together and it was built. Noah, not only was he a carpenter per se, I often wonder what he did. If he was a carpenter and he's now 480 years old, if he's practiced carpentry for 480 years, the guy's good. I can tell you that right now. He's really good at what he does. But anyhow, for 120 years, he's going to work, and no doubt hired people from the outside. I think that would be obvious that he would reach out and they would hire people, just as we did whenever we built the church. We didn't do it all. We did what we could, but we hired people from the outside. So he would have done the same thing. He would have got the manpower. But that wasn't all that he did. In 2 Peter chapter 2, 1 through 5, let me show you something here. And I'll pick these apart here in a moment. Peter says, but there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privately shall bring in damnable heresies, and even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. And many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. And through covetousness shall they with feigned words make merchandise of you, whose judgment now of a long time lingereth not, and their damnation slumbereth not. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into the chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, watch this, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. Noah preached while he built the ark. He was a preacher also, a preacher of righteousness. You say, what was his message? I don't know, but I can just imagine what it was. Something like, repent because God's judgment's coming in 120 years. Repent because God's judgment's coming in 100 years, in 80 years, 60 years. and 40 years, 20. And right up to the day that he went in the ark, Noah proclaimed the coming judgment and the need of repentance. But I highlighted and underlined something at the top on the screen in the first verse because it made me think about something that I had not thought about before. When Peter says there were false prophets also among the people. In Noah's day, no doubt, as Noah warned people about the coming judgment, Satan, as he always does, he raised up false prophets. He raised them up. And they went around and they proclaimed, and we don't have the record of it, but they proclaimed a message completely contrary to Noah's message. They would have did everything they could to undermine his message. And apparently they were very good because only 8 people get on the ark. But there were false prophets there. That's what Peter's saying. There were false prophets also among the people. He's referencing back to the Old Testament. And so there were false prophets. You know what Satan's like. He's always going to raise somebody up to try to somehow, some way, to distort the truth. And as Noah preached of the need of repentance and to put their faith in a future Redeemer and about a coming judgment, a very similar message to what is proclaimed today, by the way. The people need to repent and they need to put their faith in the coming Redeemer, Jesus Christ, and that there is a judgment that is coming. It is the great tribulation that it's going to come on the face of the entire earth. The very similar message. And so here's Noah. He's out there and he's working on the ark and they're cutting wood and they're pounding nails and they're doing everything and they're following the specs that God had given them to build the ark. And to me it is amazing whenever I read Hebrews 11:7. Watch this. It says, by faith Noah, being warned of God of things not seen as yet. What's that mean? What's the writer of Hebrews saying? Being warned of God of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world and became the heir of righteousness, which is by faith. Things not seen as yet. 2 things for sure. No floods. No worldwide, no local floods. Nothing in that line. And here you got a guy out in the middle, we're just going to say out in the middle of a field, probably picked a place out in the open where they could build the ark because of the size of it. Second thing not seen, rain. It did not rain. The earth was watered from underneath, from the mist that came up. There was no rain. With all of that said, I say this, can you imagine the heckling and the mocking that was cast at Noah in the midst of all of this? Can you imagine that? Now remember, what I want to communicate to you here is the fact that he walked by faith, and we see it in his service. It had not rained yet. There had never been a flood. And God says, I'm going to send a flood. I'm going to send the rain, and it'll rain for 40 days and 40 nights, and it'll flood the entire earth. Just think about that message. To flood the entire earth, you know how much water that would take to be able to do that? Whether he knew about the canopy suspended above the earth or not, we don't know. But the canopy collapsed, and then the rain that fell, and then the fountains of the deep broke up, and the water from underneath coming up flooded the whole earth. But Noah had never witnessed that before. And so I say this to you, it took a lot of faith. And then insert these false prophets. Insert those guys. Do you know how much Noah would have had a battle to keep from being discouraged on hard days? You and I think about building the ark. It's like, well, they just went out and they built it. Oh, really? Just think about a home project. Okay, I can think of one right now that I'm in the middle of. Started it in 2021 and building a stairway in the house. And yesterday I got halfway down with finally putting the finished steps and the risers and the treads on the stairway. And I was whipped at the end of the day. I was absolutely whipped at the end of the day. That was just not even close to this. Day after day after day for 120 years. For 120 years. You know what it's like whenever you get older. If you're not there yet, you will. But you get older, and I know whenever I was in construction and used to think about the days whenever I would retire. I don't think about those days anymore because God called me here and I can't walk away till He says you're done. But anyhow, I used to think about the days of retirement, lifting those block all the time and just the fatigue going home and then everything that you had to do at home after you labored out in the hot blazing sun. Sometimes we were on a hot black roof, a rubber roof. Sometimes we were on a steel decked roof where the sun just reflected up. Either way, I'm not saying that for any sympathy. I don't need that. God used that, and I'm glad I went through it. But I just say that to say this. He stayed the course for 120 years. He hammered, he sawed, and he preached. All the while he was heckled and mocked. All the while being made fun of for what he believed. Because only he and his family, they're the only ones that believe. That's it. That's it. There aren't any more. There aren't any more at all. Let me get you to an application, guys. Our children, your children, need to see you serving the Lord, and they need to see you committed to doing so. When you feel like quitting, you can't. You can't give up. You can step away and take a little bit of a break, but you need to stay the course, just like Noah did. Watch Galatians 6, 9, and 10. It says, "And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially to them that are of the household of faith." Paul says, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Just as Noah, 120 years of working on that ark, not even seeing a cloud in the sky, and listening to those hecklers and those false prophets that planted their message into the people who would have come by and tried. You know, you always got somebody. You always have somebody that is in the group that wants to stand and they want to argue. They want to debate. They want to. I'm sure there was somebody in Noah's day that wanted to stand up to Noah and say, let me explain to you why there can never be rain. And let me explain to you why there can never be a flood. And they would have went into all of this. Those people were very intelligent. Far more intelligent than people today. People today think they are very intelligent. They aren't even close. Because these people are about 1,600 years from the fountainhead of creation. So sin's not had the toll on them like it has for us now at about 7,000, close to 7,000 years from creation. So sin has taken its toll on mankind. And our brains are not what the brains of these people were back there. Just think about Adam. Somebody ran, we got people in the world today that think they are just so intelligent, far above everybody else. Just run a world full of animals in front of them and say, name those. Watch. What do you mean, name them? How would you come up with names? Adam did. In less than a day, he named them. He named them all. And then you want to know something else? He remembered it. That's a challenge right there, isn't it, as you get older? Just to remember it. Almost said sometimes I forget my wife's name, but I don't. But I do forget people's names. There's been people come in here, and I meet them back in the back, and when they come in for the first time, they don't know, but I'll go back in the office and write their name in my palm of my hand with a pen. And then they come out, and I look like I got a really good memory. And I've confessed that. Don't think I'm deceiving people, because I've told them. They say, well, you remembered our names. And I say, look there, I wrote it down on the palm of my hand. So anyhow, yeah. So these people were intelligent people. They would have wanted to debate. They would have wanted to do everything they could to wear Noah down. I know that. Those people exist today. It was no different back there. It was no different. They'd have wanted to wear him down, but he would not give up. And I say this, neither can we. Hebrews 12, 1 through 3, watch this. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. That's a reference to Hebrews 11 and all those people that are mentioned in Hebrews 11. And let me just clarify something. Whenever it says we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, it does not mean that the people that went to heaven that were saved are sitting up there watching what we do. That is, listen, would that be, really, think about this, would that be heaven if whenever I died I went up there and I got to sit up there and watch back here? It wouldn't be very heavenly to me. It's not what that means. A witness can be two things. They can be somebody that watches something. That's not what this one is. Or they can be someone that testifies in a courtroom. That's what this one is. They testify in chapter 11 that you can live by faith, that you can trust God. That's what that's about. Now let me go back here. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down on the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, watch this, lest ye be wearied and faint in your minds. Be careful. Because, guys, we can get tired, but we got to keep serving. We got to keep living for the Lord. We got to keep walking by faith. Philippians 1, 20 and 21, Paul wrote this, according to my earnest expectation and my hope that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but that with all boldness, as always, so now also Christ shall be magnified in my body, whether it be by life or by death. For me to live is Christ and to die is gain. Back in the middle, and at the end of verse 20, Christ shall be magnified in my body, whether it be by life or by death. That's what your kids need to see. They need to see you living for Christ, not giving up, doing what God has called you to do, serving him in whatever capacity it is, and not giving up, so that in your body Christ will be magnified. Listen, your children want to be taught. They might not admit that, but they do. And if you aren't willing to teach them, somebody else would gladly step in. Somebody that Satan has groomed will gladly step in, and they will teach your kids if you don't want to. So, back to this. Noah was a man of faith. He walked by faith. It's seen in his family, and it's seen in his service. Let me give you one more thing about Noah. Noah was separated from the world. Watch, if you would, Genesis 6, 1 through 9. Let me read these verses real quick for you. Watch these. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born unto them. So this starts back long before Noah's day. That the sons of God, those would be fallen angels. I don't have time to get into that, but they would be fallen angels. Saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives, of all of which they chose. Now, real quick, an angel is a spirit being. So a spirit being cannot have a physical relationship with a human. So apparently what had taken place was the fallen angels had indwelt the men in order to get to the women. So, and that makes sense with all of this, because what you would have had a tremendous amount of demonic possession. People were demon possessed in that day. Not much different than our day. Verse 3. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. That's an interesting verse. To give you just something to think about. God does not say, my spirit shall not always strive with the angels. He said, my spirit shall not always strive with man. You see where he puts the blame? He puts it on man. Why? Because I think, this is just my personal opinion, if I could give it to you for a second, that man had bought into something that Satan sold If you read the chapter before, if you read chapter 5, you get this record of all these individuals, and it says, and he died, 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 and he died. It's like a big old, it's like an obituary column, okay? But I think Satan came along and somehow, some way, sold to them something that if they would join up with him or whatever, that maybe they could avoid death. Whatever it was, the blame fell on man. It did not fall on the angels. Okay, but Noah would have nothing to do with it. Verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days. Now look, pay attention to that, because this confuses a lot of people. Those giants were there before. They aren't the result of this, of the demons entering into the men. They are not the results of that. It says there were giants in the earth in those days. They were there. Okay. Now watch this. And also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men. Okay, now, in addition to these giants, now you have mighty men and that were of old, men of renown. What does that mean? They would have been the elites of society, is what they were. They were the elites of society, mighty in power, kind of like the Rockefellers, the Kennedys, the Clintons, right on down the line. I don't say that to offend you, but that's just the truth. They are the elites, the Gateses. They are the elites of society that existed back there. Okay, those were the results of this demon possession. Verse 6, and it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I've created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repented me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. So, back to the point. Noah was separated from the world. He wouldn't have anything to do with that. I heard a guy say this one time, that if Noah would have had a prayer meeting in his day, he could have had it in a phone booth. Now, a lot of you, you younger people, you say, well, what's he talking about? Because they don't know what a phone booth is. I'll put it this way. He could have had it in a closet, all right, if you don't know what a phone booth is. It could have been a very little area, because it's him. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord out of the midst of all of them. And so Noah remained separated from society. He would have nothing to do with it. That speaks volumes of the guy. Let me show you something else. Matthew 24, Jesus, okay, and I want to clarify this for a moment. Jesus is talking about what life will be like on the earth when he returns at the end of the tribulation. That's this setting. Matthew 24 is for the Jews. It's not for the church. This is not the rapture, okay? I've heard that so many times. This is not the rapture. But I just want you to see something that Jesus said. He says, but as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. That's his coming at the end of the tribulation. That's whenever his feet touch down on the Mount of Olives. That's not the rapture. Watch this. For as in the days that were before the flood, okay, here we go, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark. I'll come back to that in a moment. And knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. There shall be two in the field, one shall be taken, the other left. Two women shall be grinding at the mill, the one shall be taken, the other left. Watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord doth come. Okay, so verses 40 and 42 have just confused so many people, because they say, look there, that's the rapture. Two will be in the field, one will be taken, the other one will be left. Two women shall be grinding at the mill, the one shall be taken and the other left. That's the rapture. No, it's not. This is the end of the tribulation. Okay? Watch verse 39. And knew not, the people of Noah's day, knew not until the flood came and took them all away. Who did the flood take away? The righteous or the unrighteous? The unrighteous. Took away the unsaved. the sinners, everybody but Noah. Okay, so it killed them all, probably billions and billions of people. So that's who he's saying is taken away, the unrighteous. So verse 40, then two shall be in the field, the one shall be taken and the other left. So one person, whenever Jesus returns at the end of the tribulation, will be taken in judgment. The one that's left enters into the kingdom. You see that? That's what he's teaching here. That's what he's teaching. Okay, so let me go back to verse 38 again. And I want you to notice this. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark. Let me just briefly touch on the significance of that. That means they were living for the desires of the flesh. His message had no impact on them whatsoever. But think about this. The guy's, for 120 years, he's working on the ark. He's heckled. He's mocked. You got false prophets that are there. It's just nonstop. Every day he's got to get up. I got to face these guys again. There's not a cloud in the sky. He doesn't see any evidence of what he's working for. Nothing whatsoever. And then whenever you're I'm going to just use it in our day, you're driving to work. And he's probably not driving to work. He probably built the ark right by where he lived. But he looks around and he sees people just out there. They're living and they're having a good old time. You know, they're living it up. They're eating and they're drinking and they're marrying and they're giving in marriage. They're living for the desires of the flesh. And I'll tell you this, I will say this, that as a dad, there are times when to stay the course is difficult and to stay separated from the world, I know is difficult because the world's out there living it up. They got all their toys, they got all that stuff, they're living for the desires of the flesh. And it's tempting just to go the way of the world. It's tempting just to say, you know what, I'm saved. That's enough. But you can't do that. Because there's too much at stake. Because, listen, your children are going to follow in your steps. You understand that? They're going to follow in your steps. I can assure you they will, and I'll show you that here in a moment. But you can't get plugged into the world. Because here's what people do. They try to justify going off into the world. They say, well, if I get out in the world, maybe I'll have an influence on somebody. Maybe my Christian influence will impact their lives. Oh, really? Watch Deuteronomy 20, 16 through 18. God gives the military manual, and I just cut you into the middle of it here. And he says this to Israel, but of the cities of these people, which the Lord thy God doth give thee for an inheritance, thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth. This is harsh, but it's the truth. God said, when you go into these cities, nobody lives. You kill everybody. You know what that was? That was from the kids right up through to the oldest elderly person. You say, wow, that's pretty tough. Well, there's a reason. Watch verse 17. But thou shalt utterly destroy them, namely the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee. Here comes the reason. That they teach you not to do after all their abominations which they have done unto their gods. So should you sin against the Lord your God. See what God said? You let them live. You won't change them. They'll change you. That's exactly what happened, by the way. I could give you example after example from the scriptures. And here's what I hear sometimes. I hear this, you know, guys come to me and they'll say, hey, my daughter's dating this guy. What do you think about this guy? Da-da-da-da-da. And he don't go to church. He's not a saved guy. But my daughter said, you know, if she can date him, maybe she can persuade him. I say, absolutely not. It's way too dangerous, just like it says right here. Back to the guys again. Guys, listen. It is our responsibility as we lead our kids to stay separated from the world, to show them and help them to understand that what goes on in the world is wrong. It's wrong. I heard a guy talking to his kids about marriage, and he had a really good illustration. He set them down and he said, look, guys, here's what you need to understand. Marriage is between a man and a woman, that's it. Not two men and not two women. He said the two women and the two men that enter into what they think is marriage, he said it is a mirage. He said, do you know what a mirage is? His kid said, no, I don't know what a mirage is. He said, well, if you're ever on the desert and you're really thirsty, and a lot of times your mind plays tricks on you, and you'll think that you see an oasis, you'll see a pond of water, and that you get there and it's nothing but dust. Those people that enter into same-sex marriage, it's the same thing. It's a mirage. It's not a marriage. It doesn't even fall into the definition of a marriage. A marriage is a man and a woman, not two women and not two men. It's absolutely ridiculous. And so, guys, I say this. There are a lot of mirages out there. And you'll find yourself thinking, if I just had this, maybe it'd be a little bit better. And it's a mirage. Because God tells you the opposite. Stay away from it. Just so you know, your kids will follow in your steps. In conclusion, guys, I want you to listen to these statistics. Because your life impacts your children far more than you realize. Listen to this. According to data collected by Baptist Press, if a father does not go to church, and even if his wife does, only 1 in 50 will become a regular worshiper. Did you hear that? If a father does not go to church, but his wife does, 1 in 50 kids will become a regular worshiper. If a father does go regularly, regardless of what the mother does, between 2/3 and 3/4 of their children will attend church as adults. Amazing. It jumps up way up when the father attends. If a father attends church irregularly, between 1/2 and 2/3 of their children will attend church with some regularity as adults. If a mother does not go to church, but the father does, a minimum of 2/3 of their children will end up attending church. In contrast, if a father does not go to church, but the mother does, an average of 2/3 of the children will not attend church. You see in the impact of the dads. Another study focused on Sunday school found similar results on the impact of fathers. When both parents attend Bible study in addition to Sunday service, 72% of the children attend Sunday school when grown. Wow. 72% when both the parents attend. When only the father attends Sunday school, 55% of the children attend when grown. When only the mother attends Sunday school, 15% of the children attend when grown. That's an impact, guys. I don't know if you're catching this or not. Watch this one. It's going to go further. When neither parent attends Sunday school, only 6% of the children attend when grown. But watch this one. Another survey found that if a child is the first person in the household to become a Christian, there's a 3.5% probability everyone else in the household will follow. If the mother is the first to become a Christian, there's a 17% probability everyone else in the household will follow. However, when the father is first, there's a 93% probability everyone else in the household will follow. You wonder what's going on in our world today. Let me just put it out there. Dads are not dads. They do not lead. That's the bottom line. I remember when my son-in-law was working at a place called Terry Hill. I got to say this and I got to stop. I don't want to run you over. He was working at Terry Hill. They were building concrete forms and for bridge abutments and different things. They built the form, they poured the concrete, sent the pieces out. The crane took them and set them into place and all of that. But he was telling me one day about the guys that came into work. He said, I've noticed something. He said, whenever you come in and you're going to work on the carpenter end of building those forms, he said, you have to be able to read a tape measure. He said, I have just, in my own perspective and my own observance, he said, I have found out that the guys that have had dads in their life could read a tape measure. The guys that didn't can't. Now, that's just something small and insignificant, reading a tape measure. But that helps me to make the point. Dads need to man up. I won't cut any corners on that. I'll tell you straight up. Dads need to man up. You need to be willing to make sacrifices. You got the little ones. Listen, you have them for such a small window of time. I remember back when my daughters were little, and then last Saturday it gave the last one away. It's like, where did those 30 years go? Where did they get to? They're gone in a moment. And I didn't do everything perfect. I didn't. But I did do what I could do. I'll say that. I gave it my best shot in the midst of all of it. Guys, I just say this to you. Don't forget those statistics. You need to be active. You need to be serving the Lord. You need to be walking by faith. You need to be leading the way for your children to be in church, because I can assure you, as time goes on, it's not going to get better by any means. It's going to get worse. They need a relationship with God. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the life of Noah. Lord, just looking at his life a little bit today, we grasp on to what kind of a man he was. He was a family man. He was a godly man. You were first in his life, and then he focused on the family. Father, we thank you that in his family and in his service, in his commitment, Lord, that he was an example, even for us today. Thank you that he stayed separated. And in a world in which he lived in, where it was so corrupt, yet Noah would have nothing to do with that wickedness, that sin. He kept himself separated from all of that. Lord, as dads, speak to our hearts. Challenge each and every one of us. Help us to think about our steps. Help us to think about our choices and the impact that they will have on our kids. Lord, take the message and use it today, I pray, and might it honor and glorify you. We pray it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. We'll stand and sing number 244 in closing. Let Jesus come into your heart. Number 244, we'll stand and sing verses 1.